In the cemetery at Hardest, near Berry Street, in the East Anglian county of Suffolk, stands the headstone of Violet Constance Jessop. During her lifetime she experienced a unique set of circumstances that earned her a special place in history. Little did she know that when at an early age, she decided to follow in her mother's footsteps to become a ship's stewardess, that it would lead to events unique to her alone. Both her parents, William and Catherine Jessop, had immigrated to Argentina from Ireland during the late 1800s. They had 9 children. Violet, being the oldest, was born on October 2, 1887, near Bahia Blanca, Argentina. Her father died of complications due to surgery when she was 16. Catherine decided to move the family back to England, where she became a ship's stewardess to support her family. When Violet was 21, her mother took ill, so Violet decided to follow her mother's footsteps and obtained a stewardesship in 1908 aboard the Orinoco of the Royal Mail Line. She continued to work for the Royal Mail Line until 1911, when she was hired as a stewardess aboard the luxury liner the RMS Olympic. Her maiden voyage from Southampton took place on June 14, 1911. It was on her 5th voyage, with Violet aboard, she collided with Her Majesty's battle cruiser the HMS Hawke. The impact ripped 2 large holes above and below her waterline. And although she was severely damaged, the Olympic managed to return to Southampton. In April of 1912, she was transferred to White Star Line's new ocean liner, the RMS Titanic. Violet, now 24 years old, boarded the ocean liner on April 10 to join Titanic's crew for her maiden voyage. As Titanic cruised the Atlantic on her way to New York, the first 4 days were uneventful. Her captain, Edward Smith, was also the captain of the Olympic when it collided with the HMS Hawke. But on the morning of April 14th, her ship's radio operator received messages from other ships, warning of icebergs in the waters. Then into the afternoon, the crew and passengers began to notice icebergs in their vicinity. The Titanic continued to cruise, at 22 knots into the night, relying on lookouts from the crow's nest to keep watch. About a half hour before midnight, the Titanic struck an iceberg, which seriously damaged her hull. Her watertight compartment began to fill with seawater. It was estimated the unsinkable Titanic would go down in about 2 hours. Captain Smith gave the order to abandon ship, and the crew presided over the preparations, as the lifeboats began to be loaded. Violet was ordered up on deck to help organize the confused passengers. She was eventually ordered into lifeboat number 16, and just as the lifeboat was to be lowered, one of the ship's officers handed her a baby to take care of. She, as well as the others in the lifeboats, watched as Titanic rose up on one end and sank into the ocean. The next morning, she and the other survivors were picked up by the RMS Carpathia. While aboard the Carpathia, a woman grabbed the baby from Violet's arms and sped off crying. After the Carpathia docked in New York, Violet sailed back to Southampton. On November 21 of 1916, she was aboard the HMHS Britannic when it struck a floating mine while sailing the Aegean Sea. During the First World War, the Britannic was converted into a hospital ship. Violet was serving as a stewardess for the British Red Cross. The ship began to rapidly take on water, and once in the lifeboat with other passengers, witnessed, in their horror, as other lifeboats were being shredded as they were being pulled into the ship's propellers. She decided to jump into the water, and coming up she struck her head against the ship's hull, suffering a massive head injury. She was pulled from the water into another lifeboat, where she watched Britannic slowly dip her bow, lower and lower into the sea, as she sank. From the time of the mine's explosion, Britannic went down in a mere 55 minutes. Violet returned to work in 1920. She remained with the White Star Line for a while before joining the Red Star Line, eventually returning again to the Royal Mail Line. She was the only person to survive the 3 naval disasters of the Olympic collision and the sinking of both the Titanic and the Britannic. In 1970, just a year before her death on May 5, 1971, she was interviewed about her experiences during the sinking of the Britannic.
And so when I went into the water, I went down miles and came up under the boat. To begin with, I got a terrible blow on the head, which you may think is the reason for me behaving as I am today. And I got a terrific bang on the head. I floated about. I carried 4 life belts. A young man who was partly submerged, he must have seen it, I didn't see it. One of our launches come towards him, and he called out, "There's a woman in the water."